does anybody know who Littlefoot is? Littlefoot's hanging out with Jocelyn today because today we're going to read Littlefoot's book, one of Mom's favorites when I was 9 years old when it came out in the theaters. And that is The Land Before Time. It was a favorite of mine growing up when I was somewhat young. It came out in 1988. I'm not going to say how old I am, but the movie came out in 1988, and this book was based off of the movie. And Littlefoot is from 1988 as well, the stuffed animal. So yes, he's vintage. So let us begin, because today we're going to read some of it because it's kind of long. It's not too long, but we're going to read some of it today and some of it next week. I went ahead and split it because we've been doing a lot of long videos lately. So I want to give everyone a break and just read some. And we're going to end on a kind of a sad note. So for disclaimer to all those parents out there, The Land Before Time does have a death of a mommy, just like Bambi. So that's why those two kind of hit hard for me as well after losing my mommy. So yes, there is a tearjerker in here. But it is a beautiful story that children can learn many good lessons from. So let us begin with The Land Before Time. Jocelyn, you ready? Yes? Let us go. This is The Land Before Time, which was a Lucas Spielberg presentation from the movie. And it was a Don Bluth film adapted by Jim Razzi from a story by Judy Freudbeeg and Tony Geiss. The screenplay was done by Stu Krieger and is illustrated by David Kirsxhner and Beverly Lazor. And this book design was by Deborah Bethel Ferranti. Let us begin. Chapter 1, The Birth of Littlefoot. One night, long, long ago, 3 huge figures stood in a gentle rain, waiting patiently by a lonely nest. Raindrops splashed against cracked and smashed eggshells, which glistened when a bolt of lightning zigzagged across the sky. Only one egg was still whole, and the 3 long necks were guarding it. As the 2 older, wrinkled long necks looked on, their daughter nudged her egg gently with her nose. It was taking such a long time to hatch that she was worried. Suddenly it bounced and rocked, and the 2 other older long necks smiled. But the egg didn't break open. "It is a hard birth," murmured its mother. As if in agreement, a flash of lightning cracked across the sky, and a crash of thunder shook the air. The egg bounced again and again. Then it lurched clear out of the nest, rolled down the sloping mound that surrounded the nest, and it wobbled to a stop by a shallow pond. Suddenly, a hungry claw hand leapt out of the nearby bushes. He grabbed the egg greedily and sped off. He was fast, but the mother long neck was faster. With one swipe of her strong neck, she knocked the claw hand to the ground, and the egg flew out of his hands. The claw hand scurried away, angry at being cheated out of his dinner. But now the egg rolled crazily down a steep hill. Mother Longneck watched helplessly as it went over branches and rocks and finally plopped into a swift, shallow stream. "Oh no!" she said, gasping. "The falls!" The egg suddenly went over the edge of the steep waterfall and disappeared into the foaming water. It bobbled up at the bottom of the falls and spinning and rolling fearlessly in the whirlpools. The rushing water slammed it against a bed of soft sand by the edge of the stream. The egg rocked to a stop and laid there totally still. The Longnecks rushed over to it in despair. The mother nudged the egg once more. "Is the last egg dead now too?" she thought. Suddenly, a loud crack made her pull back from the egg and surprise. I can't even say it. Surprise! There was still a chance. The three long necks watched in awe as a wagging tail popped out, sending pieces of shell flying through the air. The tail was followed by two sturdy hind legs that wiggled their way out, and finally a cute little head appeared. It was a perfect baby boy long neck. The little baby looked around bewildered. His mother cooed at him gently and looked up. As she lowered her head, he shied away. She just unburped her huge tongue and gave him a loving lick. Suddenly, the world was a fine place. "Why, he's just adorable," said Grandmother Longneck. "What will you call him?" The mother took her baby lovingly in her mouth and swung him high in the air and onto her back. The baby snugged warmly against her neck and making a bleating sound remarkably like "Mama." "I will call him Littlefoot," she said. "Littlefoot," echoed Grandfather Longneck, nodding his head. "A good name." A curious bunch of small animals had surrounded the pond. Mother and grandparents were also nodding to each other in approval. As far as any of them knew, Jocelyn, this baby would be the last Longneck born in the area, and they looked up at him with interest. "Yes," they said, whispering and gossiping with each other. "It is a good name for the last Longneck, Littlefoot." In Chapter 2, Three Horns Don't Play with Long Necks. As Littlefoot grew into a strong, handsome young Longneck, his mother and grandparents were very proud of him. Life had been very easy for a while, but the land was changing. Every day it seemed as if there were fewer leaves on the trees. "Will it always be like this?" asked Littlefoot as he chewed on some bad-tasting pine needles. "No, dear," answered his mother. "That is why we have been traveling. All the herds are following the bright circle in the sky to the place where it touches the ground. It will lead us to the great valley." At that moment, Littlefoot's mother looked up and gasped with delight. "Littlefoot, look! A tree star!" She reached up and gently plucked the last star-shaped leaf from a tall tree. She placed it next to Littlefoot, and he looked at it admiringly. "The great valley is filled with green food like this," said his mother, "and fresh, cool water. It is a wonderful place where we can all live happily together." "When we get there," asked Littlefoot impatiently, when will we get there?" I don't know," answered his mother, "but if we have faith and follow the bright circle to where it touches the ground, we will get there. Right, Jocelyn?" "Have you ever been there?" asked Littlefoot. Smiling gently, his mother answered no. "Well, how can you be sure it's really there?" asked Littlefoot. "Some things you see with your eyes, others you see with your heart," answered his mother. One of my favorite quotes. "I don't understand, Mother," Littlefoot said. "Someday perhaps you will." Littlefoot looked down at the tree star. He was about to take a bite when he heard someone yell. He poked his head through some reeds and saw a little girl, Three-Horn, charging about, butting everything and everyone in sight and yelling. Littlefoot laughed in delight. He came out of his hiding place in the reeds. The little Three-Horn took one look at him and smiled. All of a sudden she yelled, "Ah!" She was going to charge him. "What a great name! Ah! Game!" thought Littlefoot as he charged a little three-horn. Suddenly, a huge, stern-looking three-horn blocked his way. It was the little three-horn's father. He scolded at Littlefoot, and then he turned to his child. "Come, Sarah," he said. "Three-horns never play with long necks." The little three-horn seemed to change. She looked as if she wanted to attack Littlefoot for real. Littlefoot tripped over his own tail as he tried to back away. His mother came to the rescue just in time and plucked him up by the tail. Sarah's father did the same to her. Littlefoot scrambled up near his mother's head. "Mother, what's a long neck?" he asked. "Why, that's what we are, dear," his mother answered. Littlefoot said, "Oh," and thought about it. Then he asked, "Why can't I play with that three-horn? We were having fun." Questions, said his mother, sighing. "It's just the way it is, Jocelyn, right?" "We all keep to ourselves. The three-horns, the spike-tails, the swimmers, the flyers. We never do anything together." "But," said Littlefoot, his mother cut in, "when we reach the Great Valley, you will have many of your own kind to play with." Littlefoot still didn't understand. He wondered if they ever really would reach the Great Valley. He was still thinking about this while the family rested in a shady glen near a swamp. As he laid down by his mother, he put the tree star underneath his head as a pillow. He had no sooner fallen asleep when he heard a funny noise. "Ribbit! Ribbit!" He lazily opened one eye. A great big hopper was staring right him in the face. The hopper leapt away and Littlefoot jumped up and followed it. Suddenly a voice said, "That's my hopper!" It was the little three-horn, Sarah. Littlefoot said, "I saw him first, but he's in my pond," Sarah yelled back. She chased the creature down a muddy slope, bumping right into it. With a ribbit and a plop, it disappeared into a swampy pond. Then Littlefoot slid down and bumped into Sarah. He thought she would get mad, but she just splashed after the hopper, which was making bubbles on the surface of the murky brown water. Sarah giggled with delight and jumped on the bubbles, popping each one as it came up. Littlefoot joined in, and soon the two of them were playing as if their fight a short while ago had never happened. They were so busy playing that they didn't see a dark shadow growing bigger and bigger. Suddenly, a terrifying roar filled the air, and the ground shook under their feet. They both looked up and saw an enormous figure heading toward them. Their hearts froze in terror. Number 3 chapter. Sharptooth! Ah! Littlefoot and Sarah stood in the shadow of the most ferocious and deadly creature in the land, Sharptooth. "What do we do?" screamed Sarah. "Quick!" yelled Littlefoot. "Into that tree!" They both dove into a huge hollow tree, Jocelyn, but the monster saw them. With a mighty roar, he crushed the tree between his terrible jaws. Splinters of dry branches and chunks of dead bark rained on Littlefoot and Sarah as they slid into the swamp mud. "What now?" cried Littlefoot. Sarah looked around in panic. Then she spotted an opening in the thicket. "In there!" she yelled. Sharptooth was at their heels, and they could feel the ground tremble. Littlefoot and Sarah cowered in the center of the bumbles, thinking they were safe, but Sharptooth chewed and ripped through the twisted burrows. Littlefoot could feel the monster's hot breath on his tail. Leaping up to get away, he got caught in some thorny black branches. Sharptooth bore down on him with evil glee. At the very last moment, Littlefoot freed himself, Jocelyn. One of the hard, thorny branches snapped back and hit Sharptooth right in the eye. The monster bellowed in pain and reared back from the brambles. Then with a terrible fury, he plunged back into the thicket, searching for the piney creature that had dared to injure him. Littlefoot and Sarah watched fearfully as the giant creature suddenly stopped and sniffed the air. Then he stumbled out of their view. "Let's move further back," said Sarah. "No, wait!" warned Littlefoot, but it was too late. "Hey, wait for me!" he yelled as he ran after her. Littlefoot realized that Sharptooth was no longer chasing them, but only trying to save his own life. Oh, I skipped a page. Sorry about that. Littlefoot's cry gave away their hiding place, and with an angry growl, Sharptooth attacked the brushes once more. They were trapped. Closer and closer the monster came, Jocelyn. Although one of his eyes was swollen shut, he was growing softly, enjoying his moment of revenge. Then he opened his jaws and pounced. Suddenly, from out of nowhere, a huge tail slammed into him and slapped and snapped it around. It was Littlefoot's mother. Sharptooth shook his head to clear it. Then he turned to face the attacker. When he saw Littlefoot's mother, he bolted up and started to pace around her with a speed that was surprising for such a heavy animal. Sharptooth lunged at Littlefoot's mother. You could see the shadows. "Run, Littlefoot!" she yelled as she avoided the attack. Sarah and Littlefoot tried to get away, but found themselves underneath her feet. The huge monster attacked again and snapped his jaws, hoping for a quick kill. But Littlefoot's mother sideswiped the attack again and gave the monster another powerful blow with her strong tail. Sharptooth reeled back dizzily, but quickly regained his balance. He jumped on Littlefoot's mother and held on savagely, trying to bite her neck, but she twisted and squirmed and fought back. Littlefoot and Sarah cringed against the wall of the cliff, watching the battle with mounting terror. "Run! Now!" cried Littlefoot's mother. "I will follow you!" The young Longneck and Three-Horn ran as fast as they could, looking back in fright. Littlefoot's mother had now freed herself from Sharptooth's dead grip and was crushing through rocks and boulders, trying to make a path for them to escape. Once again, the beast charged, and once again, Littlefoot's mother struck him down. His fall sent a huge wave of mud through Littlefoot and Sarah, which caught them up and carried them right into the jaws of the raging monster. Littlefoot's mother, realizing that she would have to act swiftly to save the two youngsters, bravely leapt forward and hit Sharptooth in the belly with all her might. The great beast went down with a ground-shaking force. "Now, Littlefoot!" cried his mother. "Run through that canyon!" Littlefoot and Sarah scooted through a small canyon between the cliff walls. Littlefoot's mother was right behind them as Sharptooth scrambled to his feet. Just as Sarah and Littlefoot found shelter among some rocks, the ground suddenly began to move. A crack appeared and rapidly began to widen and widen. The ground underneath them rumbled and shook and tilted sideways. Rocks and trees and chunks of earth exploded into the air as they clung to each other, trying to stay on their feet. Littlefoot's mother was nowhere to be seen. Only Sharptooth was still there, stomping their way with a wild look on his face. Littlefoot realized that Sharptooth was no longer chasing them, but only trying to save his own life. Suddenly, the ground they were standing on tilted wildly, and amid a spray of hot spring and black smoke, the two youngsters slid back right onto Sharptooth's toes. Now the three of them were stepping back together. A deep canyon had opened, and they were all sliding toward it. Sharptooth was going tail first, so Littlefoot and Sarah scrambled up his body to his head. Even in his terror, the huge beast saw his chance to crush the tiny creatures who had caused him so much trouble. But as their jaws opened wide for the kill, the snap of a familiar tail sent Sharptooth flipping in the air. Littlefoot and Sarah went sailing up past him. The next moment, the huge beast fell, screeching into the dark canyon, slipping and clawing at the sides. A few heartbeats later, Littlefoot and Sarah screamed as they slipped down after him. Chapter 4. Alone and Afraid. Littlefoot and Sarah were suddenly snatched up in midair by Littlefoot's mother, but they were safe only for a moment because other cracks appeared in the ground and the earth continued to rip apart. As Sarah ran off to find her family, Littlefoot tried to stay close to his mother, but the steam gushing up from the jagged cracks in the ground, the noise, and the trembling walks terrified the herds, Jocelyn. They crashed into each other and stumbled and fell, trying to escape the terrible earthquake. In the confusion, Littlefoot lost sight of his mother and found himself alone and frightened. The earthquake was coming to an end, with a few more bursts of smoke and steam and a final shudder. The ground stopped trembling as rain began to fall. Littlefoot vainly searched for his mother. Mother! Mother! Where are you? He cried. Only the echo of his own voice came back to him. Then beyond a huge boulder, he saw her on the cracked and smoking ground. She was lying on her side, breathing with deep, wheezing gasps. Mother, what's wrong? Cried Littlefoot. Get up! His mother struggled to rise, but she was too weak. Sharptooth had wounded her after all. Mother, please get up, pleaded Littlefoot. She tried again, but once more fell back. She looked at Littlefoot in great pity. She knew that it was the end for her. She hoped with all her heart that Littlefoot would be brave and go on without her. Dear Littlefoot, she whispered, do you remember the way to the Great Valley? I guess so, answered Littlefoot. But why do I have to know? You're going to be with me. Yes, Littlefoot, that's right, said his mother. I'll be with you. All the way to the Great Valley, even if you can't see me. That's silly! I can always see you, cried Littlefoot. His mother smiled at him gently. I'll be in your heart, Littlefoot, she said. Let your heart guide you. It whispers, so listen carefully. His mother looked as if she were about to get up again, but she only raised her head and gazed into the distance. Then she lowered her long neck to the ground and was very still. Mother, whispered Littlefoot, drawing close to her. Mother! But she did not answer. Littlefoot turned and walked away into the driving rain. At the top of a steep sand hill, Littlefoot stood with tears in his eyes. Making his way down the hill, he lost his balance and tumbled to the bottom, landing on an odd-looking spiked rock. Hey! The rock yelled. Watch where you're falling! Littlefoot was so surprised that he fell off. Then he realized that the rock was a big old spiked turtle. The turtle came over and sniffed at him. My, he said. You thinking about starting a river? What's the trouble? You can tell, old rooter. It's not fair, Littlefoot wailed. She should have known better. She knew Sharptooth was dangerous. It's all my mother's fault. What am I going to do without her? Woo. Rooter looked at him kindly. Oh, I see. Why did I wander so far from home? If I hadn't, we would have never met Sharptooth. It was not your fault, Rooter said gently. It was not your mother's fault. Now you pay attention to old Rooter. It is nobody's fault. The great circle of life has a beginning. But you see, not all of us arrive together at the end. Another favorite. quote of mine. But what will I do? I miss her so much. And you will always miss her, Rooter answered. But she will always be with you as long as you remember what she taught you. My tummy hurts, Littlefoot said with a despair in his voice. That too will go in time, muttered Rooter. Then he snorted and lumbered away. The long neck was alone once more. He looked up, ready to cry again, but his eye caught something green and shimmering, floating on the wind. He brushed away a tear to see better. It was the tree star his mother had given him. It hovered over his head, then floated to the ground, surrounding him with a warm, glowing light that made him feel good all over. He looked up at the sky once more. He saw a big cloud shaped just like his mother. And the wind and the rocks and trees formed themselves into words. Dear Littlefoot, they mumbled. Do you remember the way to the great valley? Can you see the cloud shaped like his mother? Littlefoot's heart swelled with joy. Rooter was right. His mother was still with him. They were bound together with a love that was stronger than death. Remember, continued the whispering voice, follow the bright circle past the great rock that looks like a long neck and past the mountains that burn. And I'll be with you. Even though you cannot see me, I'll be in your heart, Littlefoot. Let your heart guide you. Remember, it whispers. Right, Jocelyn? Littlefoot placed the tree star on his head. He knew that he wasn't really alone. With his head held high, he marched on across the shattered landscape. A short while later, he saw someone up ahead. It was the little three-horned Sarah. He rushed up to her. Hello, he cried, glad to see her. What do you want? Snapped Sarah. Littlefoot was puzzled. Was she still angry with him? I don't know, he stammered. Where are you going? I'm going to find my own kind, she answered. They're on the other side of this canyon. But you can't get to the other side from here, said Littlefoot. Sarah said, maybe you can't. Then she started down the steep side of the canyon. Wait! Cried Littlefoot. I'm going to the Great Valley. We can help each other. Sarah was about to say that she didn't need any help when she slipped down into the darkness of the canyon. Excuse me. For a moment, Littlefoot was tempted to follow. It was better than being alone, he thought. But he didn't. He could hear Sarah shouting up to him. I'm going to find my sisters. Littlefoot turned sadly and walked toward the setting sun, even with the tree star to comfort him. He started to cry again. He hadn't gone far when he came to a small pond. In its clear surface, he saw his own tearful face staring back at him. Suddenly, his face broke into 1,000 pieces as the water erupted in front of him. And that is the end, of today's part. We will finish the last part of The Land Before Time next week, and we will find out what happened and who he saw and why the water broke in front of his face. Something about to happen, and we'll find out next week. I hope y'all enjoyed today's part of The Land Before Time, and we will see you again next week for the ending. Join us then. Have a blessed weekend. Bye-bye.